What would have been the moment in my history that I realized the fighting arts was something that I wanted to make my life? So, I'm 9 years old. It's September 1964. It's just after Labor Day weekend, and we're on our way back to school. We have an assembly at my school, and I remember it very, very well because we had a singer by the name of Buffy St. Marie come to sing for us. And following the assembly, we had a film to watch. And we all sat in the auditorium to watch the film. And the film was shot by the National Film Board, and it focused on the life of a young man who had been a pilot for Air Canada, who had been very passionate about judo and had gone on to win provincial championships, the Canadian championship, the world championship, and then ultimately his road to the Olympics. And his name was Doug Rogers, and the film was called Road to the Olympics. I sat as a young man watching that, and look at, as a lot of kids of that age, I had my own heroes, Batman, Superman. I wasted a lot of valuable time enjoying those comic books of that era, but I knew that they were just comic books and those people were not real. But here, in this documentary film, I was watching somebody who was real. And I watched the transformation, and that message that I picked up from that film was that if you are truly passionate about something and you're willing to put the work in, you can make a transformation, and one person can make a difference. I didn't realize at that age in my life that the fighting arts would become my entire life. But in fact, in retrospect, it was the beginning, and likening the fighting arts to a pathway, it depends how far down the pathway you get before it becomes evident that the destination isn't really the goal. It becomes the journey, and that journey has been wonderful. Hi, I'm Patrick McCarthy, and I'd like to talk to you about the fighting arts. Most importantly, what the fighting arts can do for you, especially as a youth, when you find that's something that is truly passionate about, it provides a wonderful pathway to condition the body, cultivate the mind, and nurture the spirit. But more importantly, and particularly with the fighting arts, the pathway is about learning more about yourself, finding a source of strength, becoming empowered by it, and learning what happens when you face failure. One of the most important things, particularly for young people, is finding the courage and strength to overcome obstacles. And one thing about the fighting arts is that it provides you with that pathway and a way with which to not only face your fear, but how to pick yourself up after failure and continue on. There's a wonderful cliche about an idle mind is a devil's workshop. But show me a young person who is passionate about something. It doesn't have to be the fighting arts, for example. But I'm just saying that the fighting arts provide you physically, philosophically, morally, and spiritually that strength in all departments to be able to help pick yourself back up and carry on. And you know something? Even if you never accomplish the outcome or the goal, it's not about the possession, it's the pursuit. It's not about the finish line, it's about the race. And that's why I believe that the journey through the fighting arts is such an important one for you. Before the world had form, two deities stood at the gateway of the heavens. Looking down, they thrust their jeweled spear into the swirling mists, and upon withdrawing it, drips of brine collected at its tip and fell back down into the mystic ocean below, forming the islands now known as the Japans. And so it was, according to the Nihon Shoki, that the samurai warrior ancient Japan lived with a philosophy unique in the annals of mankind. To pledge one's life for one's master was, for the samurai warrior, the most glorious death. And so they lived each day with only the constant desire for that beauty in their daily life. This philosophy, live to die for one's master, penetrated the lives of the common people. And so it was through this legacy that the heritage of the fighting arts have been handed down to this day. I was very passionate about the history and the anthropology, the culture of the fighting arts, and set my sights on migrating to Japan back in the mid-1980s. Little did I know how long I would spend there, nor the impact that living in that culture would have upon me over the decade that I resided there. There's a wonderful quote that I was taught by one of my Zen masters back in the day. And in Japanese it goes like this: onko chi shin. Onko chi shin. And onko chi shin means this: that if you study the past or the old, you can better understand the new or the present. One reason why I found critical thinking, or that ability to think outside the box, so important here is because asking questions is the most acceptable mechanism that helps penetrate the ambiguity that tends to shroud the fighting traditions. Asking those questions and continuing to search until you find the answers helps eliminate the ambiguity that tends to shroud what is otherwise a very simple tradition to understand. Well, what does this have to do with anything really? I found this, that during my search for better understanding the historical, technical, and tactical ambiguities of the fighting arts, because of the differences in Eastern and Western culture, I actually found more about myself. And by looking without and searching the annals of history, so too was I able then to look inward and find out more about myself. And in finding out about that, I also discovered the source of human weakness and the inner location in which all of our battles should be first fought and won before we're ever able to overcome these weaknesses and apply that strength to improving the quality of our daily lives. And therein lies an important lesson for understanding why history in itself is so important. History has an interesting way of repeating its mistakes. And so therefore, if we take the opportunity to study something about it, not only we will learn more about ourselves, but how to avoid those mistakes that history has proven. I did a lot of soul searching as a young man, and to say that I had a troubled or turbulent youth growing up in the 60s would be an understatement. I searched diligently for my identity on the streets, and I worked in some of the roughest watering holes in some of the suburbs of Toronto as a young man. And it was not an easy time, but I was lucky. I found a mentor early in life, and in Japanese we refer to a mentor as a sensei. Sen is a word that actually means before. Sei has to do with a birthday. So in many ways, a sensei is somebody who was kind of born before you. But there's a difference between a sensei and a coach or a life coach and so on. And the idea that someone is able to mentor you through example, through actions, not necessarily words, was something that spoke very loudly to me. Early in our relationship, my sensei made a a comment to me that didn't tend to make a lot of sense, and I questioned him many times about that. And he would refer to me often directly and say, "Too many mind." You know, it wasn't really until I watched the Tom Cruise movie many years later, and I watched that there's a very interesting fight scene with Tom Cruise in the movie, and the one of the samurai who is trying to teach Tom Cruise how to get over himself and stay focused and pay attention and not linger so much with this mindset. Kept hitting it with his wooden sword called a bokken. And the young man who spoke a little bit of English looked at Tom Cruise and said, "Oh, too many mind, too many mind." And it was fascinating that I was able to, I call these BFOs blinding flashes of the obvious. It was an epiphany. And I remember back to my teacher saying, "Too many mind." And he used the term Zanshin. So now, you know, many years later, after more than a decade in Japan, I learned to speak, read, and write Japanese, and you know, some of my translations have become quite well known in the world of the traditional fighting arts, such as the bubishi, for example. And but when I studied the etymology of the calligraphy, I discovered that the word Zanshin is made from two separate ideograms. The one means lingering or to linger, and the other one is a kokoro, or means spirit or heart. But in this case, the grammatical composition that brings them together makes it mind, how one thinks, but not just at the moment, but really throughout life, from the womb to the tomb exclusively. And so the term Zanshin became the focus of a study for me. And then as I came into contact with other teachers who also shared their understanding of this word, I found a really interesting comment that spoke to me. In World War I, when airplanes took to fighting for the very first time, it wasn't terribly sophisticated. I mean, they're literally dropping bombs by hand out of an open cockpit at a low ceiling of maybe 1,500, 2,000 feet. But the engines were so loud and it was so cold that you could hardly hear yourself think up there. The point being this, is that if you didn't know what was going on all around you at the same time, you could very well be killed. You couldn't hear another aircraft come up. There was no radar in those days. How would you be able to tell who was behind you, who was in front of you, behind you, unless you could see it? So they established a mindset, and they called it situational awareness. And I thought that was a brilliant term to help better help describe Zanshin. Now, in the fighting arts, we generally use the term Zanshin. Say, for example, in karate, we finish a movement, and as we slowly come back and turn our attention back to the shomen, or the front where we started at the embusen, we have what we call that lingering mind, or that remaining thought over our fallen victim. But there's more to it than that. And so once again, I go back to this whole journey thing. Remember I said earlier, likening what we do to a pathway. It depends how far down the pathway you get before it becomes evident that the destination isn't the goal. It is the journey. And each time we attempt to practice something that we're already familiar with, it has a way of crystallizing and meaning something more to us. How many times have you read a book a second or third time, and you catch something that you haven't got on the first few times? Now you have contrast. So in using Zanshin, especially in the fighting arts, and then using that gift in our daily life, we become more aware of what's going on around us. So someone asked me to say, you know, look at, you've studied the fighting arts really, in my case, really for my entire life. And is there one thing that might be more important than another. Or if I was to give a piece of advice to a young person about what's the one thing I think would be more valuable than anything to you, it's this. Life is not easy. What you bring to it is what you get back from it. There's always going to be a few people who can do everything. There's always on the other end of that spectrum, and God love them, people who are completely helpless. But fortunately, and through the law of reciprocity, we tend to get back out of life exactly what we put into it. There's a great expression by Funagoshi Gichin, one of the pioneers of modern karate. He said, "The fighting arts is like boiling water. You have to keep the fire underneath it." I think what's important for any person in life is to find out who they are and what they want, and continue to pursue their dream. And even if they never accomplish their goal, guess what? They're living their dream. But that said, you have to remain aware, not just of who you are, but where you're going and how you're going to get there, and what you're going to do when you run into barriers, how to overcome them. And my friend, to do that, you're going to need some strength. Best place I know to get that strength? Right inside. And that's why a mentor or a sensei is important, because the sensei is the person who helps show you what is possible in your life. So what do I think is important? Finding out who you are and not being afraid to live your dream.